Awesome. Yeah, well, good afternoon. I feel like it's afternoon for everybody, or morning. I guess it's only 11 here on the Pacific Coast. My name is Brian Fretwell. Next to me is Bree Zoller and Amber Hamilton. Even all the whole Finding Good team is here for our third installment of the Finding Good podcast, which we're sort of figuring out as we go a little bit. I think the real hope here, the real intention here is to help people like kind of identify some questions that will change their conversations utilizing our framework we call transformational listening. And so what this hour is about is introducing you to some questions and then showing you why we designed a question this way, talk a little bit about the science behind it, but then engage them. And that allows you and those of you that might be listening outside of this live call some ideas for how to change your conversations, ways, different questions you can use, and really being able to think through what is it you're trying to create. And it's all based on the idea that the biggest source of influence we have is in listening. If you think about the most influential person in your life, most people will tell you, or when we ask people who the most influential person in their life was, almost consistently they say it's a person who listened to them, the person who understood them, the person that helped them feel heard. And so what we try to do is approach that scientifically. What type of questions or what type of listening actually helps someone feel heard, and why is that going on? And we do that through questions, but also we do that through entire applications of what we call transformational listening. Today, we're going to talk about kind of that first level area of asking questions, the questions that can change that conversation. So we're going to outline a question. We're going to talk to you about why we use this type of question, what challenge it's there to showcase. Bree's going to help us out with some of the science behind that, because in our membership area, we outlined it. We have one of these questions a week, and there's always a science article that we tie into because all the questions are tied to different psychological concepts, everything from growth mindset to today, which is strengths and skills and natural abilities. And so being able to see what we're trying to influence through the question. And then we'll get into the really fun part, which is trying them on in real time with real people, and then maybe even seeing how you guys might change this question or alter this question to make it more unique to you and your situation. Sound good? Bree, I feel like I just trimmed that down from like 10 or 15 minutes of me introducing things to like we got that down to
we're getting
3 or 4
faster.
minutes. So I want to start with so this week's question, and Bree will pull it up here in just a second, but it's a question based on the area in our what we call the FIRES model. Then that's the model we use to design questions. It's an acronym for feelings, influence, resilience, ethics, and strengths. And so this week's question in the last week, what is a new skill you successfully practice, is about focusing on that area of strengths. So how can we use questions to help people clarify strengths, natural talents, those sorts of things? But just want to share with you because there was an application of this that I had this week that really reinforced like the importance of a question like this. And for those that don't know, these conversations started 8 years ago with a group of my close friends that we have a call every week where we can only talk about what went well the prior week, and the other friends can only ask questions, and we can't give each other suggestions, opinion, feedback, or advice, which interestingly enough is the underlying components of all of the Finding Good processes as well. But we were having a discussion just a week or two ago, and one of my friends on the call was talking about like, oh, what went well was, he wasn't worried about things as much. He wasn't, ruminating on the things that he didn't want, and he saw that as progress. That is something that went well for him in the week. And one of the other folks on the call just came up with this just kind of brilliant question of like, well, what is it that you're doing differently to create that experience? Like, because he talked about I wasn't doing this, so I had like more energy, more of these other things. And so the question was, like, what do you have more of now that is allowing that stuff to go out? And there was a whole conversation that followed it, but what was unique is that in answering that question, this friend of mine says, I didn't really think about the skill I had developed. Like, he was really focused on the, like, I'm not having this overwhelm, I'm not ruminating on, here's all the things I'm not doing. But in fact, I am doing, like, I'm more mindful now. I'm more confident now, right? And I've built this through movement and through practice. And he started outlining all of these skills that then led to less ruminating, less of these things, and ultimately more confidence. And why I'm sharing that is because when we think about a question like the one outlined this week, it can feel really obvious. Like, what is a skill you practice? Like, and I'm asking that thinking, well, this person should know that. Like this should be easy knowledge there. But what we find over and over again is in a question like this, like, we don't often think about what strengths we're using as individuals to tackle some of the bigger challenges in front of us. We just go out and do it. And then our brain focuses on, well, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to engage in that anymore. And so this week's question is really about, like, how do we amplify that? Like, how do we help people see, here's your natural tools that are helping you get through this? So Bree, tell us about the design of this question and some of the science behind it.
Absolutely. So I am going to pull up my screen again so you guys can see the question. We can walk through it together. So first, I want to walk you guys through the question itself. And I'm actually going to ask some questions in here of you guys. I would love it if you wouldn't mind responding. So we have the question here of, in the last week, what is a new skill you successfully practiced? We're making some assumptions with this question, aren't we? I'm curious, can you guys point out to me, what are the assumptions that we're making in this question? Feel free to take yourself off mute, or you can pop it into the chat.
That we had the opportunity to try out new skills and we weren't in a survival type of context.
Yep, totally. It's, making the assumption that you actually went and did this thing. Not only that you actually did it, but also what else?
That you did it well.
Yeah, that we achieved it. We did it successfully. Thank you. So that's our big assumptions here. We have the time aspect of it, that we did something within the last week. The assumption that you went and did something, and not only that, but you did it well. So that's the structure of our question that we have here. And I always like to tie in a little bit of science of why we use this question, why it's important. So our referenced article that we have in here this week comes from Harvard Health. And basically, this all comes down to almost physical fitness for the brain, if you will. We have this fabulous thing called brain plasticity or neuroplasticity, where basically our thinking patterns, we travel the same roads almost every single day with our thinking patterns. And by going down a different thought pattern or a different road, like thinking about this new skill, remembering the process of practicing that new skill, and thinking about the success that we achieved, we can help someone actually develop a stronger brain, if you will. And Godswill, I see that you also posted into the chat here that you learned the skill quickly. Absolutely, that's a big assumption of the question as well. So that's the purpose and the intention behind this question of asking and helping someone in order to help them develop more in the future. We could also have a little bit of a selfish intent with this question. Perhaps we're trying to learn a new skill, or perhaps we're trying to figure out how to do something a little bit differently, and we want to get input from someone else. So it could be two aspects that we're asking this question. One thing is to connect with someone else and to help influence them. The other side is maybe we're going to get some good pieces of feedback ourselves. So that's our question of the week.
So from here, we're gonna engage this directly, but I want to address some of the questions in here. So Lisa says, can you define natural tools? Not really well, Lisa. I can't. But what I mean is, like, we all kind of have natural gifts, right? To whatever degree. And so when I say like natural tools, it's like things that come naturally to you, right? So for me, I'm not necessarily naturally organized, but I'm naturally creative, right? And so I would call that like a natural tool that I have. And so when we say skills, but specifically like that term, like natural tools, I like to use that to kind of like help someone see like, oh, this is unique to me, right? And that's especially when we're talking about strengths, is that like what we see really consistently is that the thing someone is the best at is the thing they take the most for granted. And what I mean by that is I can almost always identify somebody's biggest strengths when I hear them say something like, oh, everybody can do that. Like the best way to identify somebody's natural skill is when they say everybody can do that, because it's so second nature for them that they're like, oh yeah, no, this is easy. And so a question like this becomes important because we get to set that like, no, not everybody can do that. Like this is something that you're doing, and here's the impact that might have. So use that natural word to kind of help someone see that this strength that you have might be unique to you, and it might not be something that everyone shares, even though that's not your actual lived experience with it.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add in, Megan just popped into the chat that bias,
Yeah.
the bias that creates is immense. Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's an opposite bias there, which is what I forget the term with, like when I'm really confident in what I know about something, it usually is something I'm actually not really good at, right? So that's, what is that term? I'm blanking on it right now, but there is a bias that it's something principle. I'll remember it as we go through. But like, yeah, usually when somebody's talking really confidently about something, like it's a good way to check in, like, is that the thing that they actually know, right? Like, anyway, so the less somebody questions themselves, the less. Anyway, sorry, got a little rabbit trail right there. So a couple of the other things in here, and Megan pointed it out in your response there, Megan. But this idea, like when we're dealing in those assumptions, and I want to showcase this when we entertain the question with somebody in here, is that like that we got to try this skill and we didn't have this, right? So like a survival situation where we actually, Dunning-Kruger, thank you, like where what we see and what we're actually trying to address, and we go into this in depth in the workshop, so I'll just talk about it briefly here. But it's that like I tried a skill, and even successfully tried a skill doesn't, or practice a skill, as the question simulates, like we often approach that in a very binary manner. I did it in its completion and I did it well. And so I'll take like mindfulness, because my wife's background is mindfulness as a counselor, and what we see people like, did you try meditating today? Or yeah, did you practice meditation, using the same way this word is created, or this question is framed? If you ask somebody like, did you practice meditation today? They may have sat for 3 to 5 minutes, right? And then just really struggled, couldn't get their thoughts together. And so they'll say, no, I didn't, because they didn't do it successful. They didn't do it in the outline that they had in their head. And what we try to do through a question like this is like, what is saying like, what about that 3 to 5 minutes was successful? The fact that you sat down, the fact that you wrestled with those thoughts. Like maybe it wasn't perfect, maybe you didn't get all of this, but we want to really highlight, and I'm saying this because this is often when we see the most like immediate impact in a question, is when somebody gets validated for the little thing that they haven't recognized as progress or using a strength, right? Because we tend to be like, oh, I didn't until I met this, and it's really like, no, we're amplifying that little piece that you did do, right? So those, good to identify like that assumption in here is there for a reason, because we're trying to really get out of that really binary way of thinking about our own success and strength and things of that nature. So let's get into the fun piece. and it's always fun for me because I like asking these questions is maybe my favorite thing to do. But on that, is there anybody here on the call that would be game for a 5-minute conversation where I'm going to start with this question and I can only ask you questions for a full 5 minutes. I cannot give you any suggestions, opinion, feedback, or advice. Lisa, right out of the gate. Love it. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to engage in this, and we do this on the practice sessions. For those who've been in the membership, you go in the practice session, you get 10 minutes with one person, you get asked questions for 10 minutes. Now, what I want you to watch for as I'm asking these questions of Lisa is like, try to identify like why I'm asking them. What would be of interest to me in asking Lisa these questions, but also like what's going on with Lisa? What do you notice changing? What do you notice about her inflection as we go? And then as we get done, like what is the benefit of that conversation? Okay, so there's a lot there. Just maybe pick one. Anyway, all right, Lisa, you ready to go?
I am.
All right, so go ahead and you're off of mute. Bree, could you do the time? Awesome. Okay, so Bree's going to start the timer at 5 minutes, and I got to recheck in to make sure I get the question right here. But Lisa, in the last week, what is a new skill you successfully practiced?
I was going to say, how about a skill that you have that you haven't used in a long time? Would that still qualify?
Well, what is?
I don't know if I
it's a
really
really
have
good
used any
question.
new.
Yeah. So in the question says in the last week, what is a new skill so maybe it's what is a skill you used in a slightly different way?
Hmm.
Can you think of an example of that in the last week?
Well, I mean, I've used tapping on and off for healing purposes, but I haven't used it for quite a while. And
Okay.
and normally when I would do my tapping, it would just be for feelings that I'm having at the time. And today I actually went in, and over the last couple of days, been going in and working with the tapping for limiting beliefs, which is something that because I think I explored it like a few years back briefly.
So tell me about that experience of using it this week. What was helpful about using that skill this week?
It's I just think that through my journey here that I could have greater understanding. I had better ways of looking at it, and the ability to kind of dive in deeper to kind of get down to some really core issues that I've had. So yeah, it just seemed to work a lot better for me than it had in the past.
So
Yeah.
what did you through using that skill, what did you gain more of this week, specifically this week? Like you, from before you tried it to right after you tried it, what did you feel you created more of using that skill, more of for yourself?
Definitely felt more healing. I felt more awareness of some of the issues that I've been working with, and that I actually can get down to those depths and be able to heal these things. So yeah, which is something I didn't really think was possible for me. So that was huge.
So opening that idea, like I can get down to these things, what does that allow you to feel more of? Like that, like you had that like awareness, it sounds like that, oh, I may be able to get down to this, and that, what feeling did that create in that moment for you?
It created a kind of like an aha kind of feeling. It was like, oh, it was painful, but it was a lot of relief and wonderful insight. I felt really good about myself that I could actually get down and explore that to, to the depth that I have, which can open up so many other things. So, yeah, I did. I felt really good about it. As I said, it was kind of tough going through it. Um, I had to really work at getting myself deeper into it, but yeah, I came out of it feeling really proud of myself that it actually worked. That I
And
actually was able to get down.
when you say you had to work at it, what is that? What how did you define working in that moment? Like what were you in that experience? Like what was the work part? Was that
I
focusing
think the
more?
work
Was it
part, yeah,
okay?
I'm sorry. I think the work part for me was that because sometimes I think my mind can get resistant
Mm,
about, diving in. It wants to kind of, okay, that's good, let's pull out. That's all right.
yeah.
You know, um, it's, having to overcome that fear of,
Mm.
getting down deep enough to pull these things up and out. And
And in
yeah,
that moment, what is the thing you did to? Because I know I've had that like, oh, I could here, and like, nope, I'm gonna go over here instead. But in that moment, what did you do to push through that fear? Like, was it a different thought you had? What is it like? What enabled you to, in that moment, to push into that fear?
I think part of it was the awareness that I was doing that
Mm,
my mind was trying to take me out, like
right.
I was trying to be like, that's good, you know, let's just fluff that over, and I was aware of it. And
Mm,
I just said, no, you know, let's stay. We gotta get in here. We gotta do this. But, what else are you feeling right now? What is that? What is that? And I could feel the um, the sadness. I could feel the pain that was in there. Um, and I had, just staying with it, continue to tap and and work through it the best I could. I really felt like I've made some shifts. So I was very
so it
pleased with
sounded to me
that.
like,
Oh, we're at 5
oh, it's
minutes.
that five. Okay. So if we give Lisa a round of applause. Nice
Thanks,
work.
guys. Thanks, guys.
Nice work, Lisa. So, Lisa, we'll start with your experience of the conversation. Yeah, what did you notice in the conversation, and what were potentially the benefit to the conversation for you?
Um, I think it helped me to really see what I was able to achieve.
Hmm.
It actually, I've actually been feeling a sense of success with it. That so even when I was finished, um, I had a sort of, you know, I had other things going on. I just kind of jumped up and went without taking that moment to reflect. So you actually gave me that opportunity to reflect on how it went, and how maybe next time I can get in deeper, or you know
Mhm.
um, question different things to be able to do that. So thank you for that. That's huge.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And we call that kind of the clarity part. And what we know is that like our brains actually don't do a really good job of like, oh, here are the things I'm doing well by ourselves. But in this conversation, we can actually access those easier, especially when someone else is interested. And that's the other question I have for you is like, how was it having a stranger ask you those pretty direct question? So I'm a relative stranger. We've met on a Zoom call once before, but right,
Yeah. Yeah.
like tell me about what was your safety slash comfort level? Like how did you feel in going through those? Yeah.
That's something that a great question. Really, such a great question, because that actually came up for me.
Hmm.
That feeling of vulnerability. Here I am talking about my healing journey and all this stuff. And it's really hard to do in front of people.
Yeah.
For me it is. Maybe for some it's not, but for me it is. Um, I was feeling very uncomfortable. I was feeling
Hmm.
very vulnerable. Um, and I think with all hard things that I do, and maybe it just was a part of my upbringing, and maybe something else I need to look into, because I just, I feel like I almost check out of that. You know what I mean? Like I have to say, this is a hard thing and I just have to do it. And I'm just not gonna think about it. I'm just gonna go and do.
Yeah.
And you know, hope for the best. So
And
that's what I really was doing. I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna have to bite the bullet on this one. I'm just gonna have to go in and let's just go and get it done.
yeah, and I appreciate that, or appreciate you sharing that, but also doing that, because one of the thing that, and this was, it took me almost like a year and a half of like really engaging these questions, and people would use the term vulnerability all the time, and I was like, we're not being vulnerable. We're talking about good things. We're talking about what went well. We're talking about your strengths, and you're like, that's not vulnerability. But what we discovered, and the science really backs it up, and it's one of the PhD psychology professors that helps us on this, is like, you're actually asking them a scarier thing than, and the example we always use is like, if you were to walk into a group of people you knew, like the team that you worked on, and you had one of two choices. You could tell the team like, hey, I screwed up on this and it made your job and your job and your job this much harder, right? Or you walk into the same team and say, I did this thing really good and it made your job easier and your job easier, your job easier, here's how. Most people will pick I would rather tell them what I did wrong than what I did right. And what we know is that, like, in that kind of neuroscience of connection, is like, when I say, here's the thing I did well, we put ourselves at risk for rejection, risk for isolation. We even have, like, if somebody's overconfident, we have words like arrogant and that sort of thing to identify somebody that is sharing their, like, good things a little bit too much, right? Or we have that kind of feeling, and that's a reject. So we want to be humble and not do that. At the same time, like, when we do share that, it actually has a much bigger, much more positive effect on the brain when we can share it with someone else, and we don't get that that rejection, but instead we get acceptance and interest and understanding. And then our brain says, oh, okay, this is value I'm bringing to the pack, and it's been accepted. And then we can, and you can almost feel the difference on people when they're able to have that experience. Yeah. Now I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Bree.
Oh, I wanted to add on to that, Brian, I can see this from a family perspective, a business perspective, people that are in our world that we're engaging with on a regular basis. It is so natural for us. And Lisa, you mentioned this of, you did it and then you had something to do afterwards. So you didn't do the reflection, you didn't do the celebration. So rarely in our society, we are always just looking for the next thing. We are, not sticking in the moment to celebrate the thing that we're doing and to recognize it. And there's so many benefits to recognizing when we do something well, because I'm willing to bet, Lisa, the next time that you are going through this and you want to use that skill set again, it's going to be a little easier for you because we just talked it through. We reinforced that for you. We talked about how you went about doing it. We clarified questions of, Brian asked at one point, you said you worked really hard. What does working really hard look like? Really digging into those bits to help that person be able to achieve those things again in the future and continue with skill development.
And on that, and this will be for anyone to answer, like, this is like I think the hidden part of this that I enjoy maybe the most is like, so I'll ask it this way, that question of like, hey, what did hard work look like? Can anybody identify what is the benefit to me of asking Lisa that question? Like, how does Lisa's answer to that question benefit me? Like, why would I actually be interested, like, authentically, not even knowing Lisa or that situation, when she said, like, I had to work hard to overcome this, like, my brain trying to tell me to bail, and here's how, and here's what working hard looked like in that situation. Again, can anybody identify what's the benefit to me? Megan, go ahead. I see you're off.
Thank you. I see that as setting some of the context and like, because it's also a vulnerable space, it shows you where some of the boundary for next questions can be, because this is recognizing where I see in myself and another question towards won't necessarily feel invasive because it's meeting them where they're already appreciating, so that that introspection can be triggered even more. It creates that safety and the context towards where her action steps currently are and her framing of that awareness and recognition to expand upon.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like Megan, I feel like we're going to record this and then use this for explaining like what's going on in our transformational listening, because you did that so perfectly and succinctly. There's that bit of like, it sets Lisa up and it's creating that safety. And at the same time, there's something even more, I call it selfish, about me asking a question like this. And Katie kind of alludes to it in there. I can use it for myself. And I can tell you in the moment, Lisa, that like that you were describing that, like, oh, I had these thoughts and my brain wanted to be like, no, we're good right now. And I dove in. I was in my own like, scenario of that. I was like, oh, I know what you're talking about. I know that, like, that self-awareness moment where I'm like, I know, like, if I take another step in here, I'm headed into discomfort and like self-reflection and like, here's the work you need to do. And I know I can back out of that. And so there was like, for me, there was like genuine interest. And this is something like we really try to reinforce in the conversation, is in that genuine interest, like, because I'm actually like, I'm kind of saying like, Lisa, teach me how to do it, right? Without saying, because if I, and this is the difference, if I asked you like, Lisa, how would I go about, how do you recommend I go about stepping into the hard thing? My brain's going to kind of shut off, because now you're going to give me advice and my brain's going to be like, well, that doesn't work for me and that's not my situation. But you're sharing your experience of how you did it. And so my brain is actually in a much better place to actually learn from that. And so in that moment, I was like, yeah, no, how do you do that? Like, and I've almost like taken notes like, oh yeah, yeah, you got to catch it and then you got to do it anyway. And you got to, and I just like, for me in that moment was like, oh yeah, yep, we're fighting similar battles, likely a lot different, but like, here it is. And so when I like looking into how the questions are beneficial for us, and I always really reinforce this, especially in transformational listening, is the secondary skills that we're taught to show that we're listening. Pay attention, make eye contact, lean forward. You don't have to worry about any of those as much when you're asking questions that you are personally interested in. And I'm interested in them for Lisa and your journey and helping you clarify. But if I can identify like, oh, whoa, tell me about your experience because I can kind of relate to it, or I can self-reference that experience, I don't need to remember to pay attention. Like I know in my particular case, I need to remember to like, hey, like stay back a little bit. You're in this person's space. Like I get a little too interested. Like, hey, tell me all about that, right? So I got to back off the intensity. But I hope that makes sense for folks. Of like, we call it initially selfish listening because it feels kind of selfish. But like when we're engaged in the question, like. And being able to challenge like that assumption, what does work look like? We're actually doing it, or rather, it can be really powerful when we're doing it to clarify for ourselves, or get new ideas for ourselves, or reference that against our own story. Godswill said it helps you. Oh, go ahead.
I have to thank you because I really appreciated you digging into those questions, because again, it helped me a lot. I really felt like there was compassion behind it, and I think that's where I kind of have issue. I just have a hard time with knowing, where is a boundary. I mean, for me, when I'm talking to people, when I'm wanting to ask questions, I'm like, is that appropriate to ask? Should I go down that hole with them? Is that and that's where I kind of get caught up.
Yeah.
Probably overthinking. But
Well,
I
and I want to add on to that though. Oh, sorry, Lisa.
No, go
When you
ahead.
were talking about, like, I don't know if I can ask this question. What can we do to find out?
Hmm.
We can just ask someone, I would like to ask you this question. Is that okay? Are you comfortable with that? And then when they give you permission, which is a huge part of these conversations that we have, when they give you permission, you can dig in a little deeper and feel a little bit more comfortable with that.
And it's really
Mhm.
right into what Megan had outlined so succinctly. There is and one of the I guess you will, like, skills that we teach that I was utilizing there is, like, one of the ways to make sure we're getting, as Bree said, permission in the conversation is I'm going to make a point of trying to use your words. And this is different. This isn't the kind of active listening, parroting back to, like, did I hear this correctly? What I'm doing is I'm taking a word, in this case, like I had to work on it, or I had to awareness. And instead of just checking in on it, I am actually, like, testing your definition of it. Right. So you said awareness. So I kind of have permission to explore that. Right. And where we get off track is when we start, like, oh, she said awareness, so she must mean this. And then I go ask a question over here based on my assumption, or where I think you're going, or where I think you should go. And now I'm out of what we call authentic curiosity. Now I'm into projection or advice, or all of that things. And there's places in conversations that all of that's appropriate. But when we're practicing kind of this, what we call, like, transformational listening, the one of the real keys to keeping in permission and safety and making it comfortable for that other person to be vulnerable is following their lead. Right. I am going to use the words that you gave me, but I'm going to check my assumptions on what those words mean. Yeah. And through that, I'm, like, really focused on, like, okay, like, oh, wow, now, because there comes a point where I'm like, oh, wait, this person's experience is kind of similar to an experience I've had. So now I want to know, now I'm really interested in, like, whoa, how did you do it differently? And what did you try? Because I get to explore that in a space where I'm not obligated to do it. Because, like, if I would have asked you, like, again, your opinion or your advice on how do you do it, and you told me, oh, when it got hard, I stepped through this, then I have this, like, I kind of can leave with this feeling of, like, indirect obligation. Oh, Lisa gave me advice to explore the hard things this way, so next time I better go do that. Versus when you share your experience, I have full, like, wow, that's great. I'll never try that, but that's great. You know what I mean? Like, I have full like, freedom to not feel as though, like, I'm obligated to do it in that way. And you don't feel like you're, coaching me or telling me how to do it, which can be equally as sort of uncomfortable. Boy, we just ran through some time. See, love to get any questions, comments from anyone else, and specifically, is there, like, how would you use this question for yourself or for someone else? And or are there things that, like, that you would want to change about it? And I'm happy to help you, like, come up with a way of addressing the question, like, where would you use this, with who, and how? I get to come up with less questions at one time. That's really overwhelming. So take any one of those questions. Yeah. So again, if you're in the group, you have general questions or comments, this is the time for them, and try to personalize this and leave you all with something that you can go and try on when you leave. Yeah.
So one observation I had when you were talking this back through is the importance of the common definition, but not there's often a power struggle in common definitions, and there's an aspect of dominance and, versus collective, and where you are really determines definition, whether or not that's a scientific definition of resiliency that has a mathematical formula, or a sociologic definition of resiliency where you're dealing with the outcomes and how they fit within. And you could be dealing with one physical patient and need resilient metal beam put into the bones, but you need also a resilient patient coming out of it. And how do we have a multidisciplinary conversation when definitions get overlapped, confounded, and assumed, and there's no space for the space that you're holding in a more one-sided conversation versus a collaborative space, and the importance of those definitions that does not have any space in most conversations.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah, and it's reinforced by, you know, our brain's desire for efficiency, with creating habits. Oh, you said this, okay, I know this, and we're on the way. And it's like you just outlined the reason we have this, like the big acronym no SOFA, suggestions, opinion, feedback, or advice. Not because we don't need them and they're not useful. It's that once you give me your opinion, I am filtering through my experience of that of that opinion, and now I've defined you. Now there's actually very little room for exploration. Whereas if we're focusing on experience, what is your experience with this? Then the door becomes only more and more open of, you know, places to explore. And that one of the biggest skills that people develop in these practice sessions that make the biggest impact on their daily interactions and their interactions with their team is that, like, stop and check your assumption on whatever this word is. And I love how you identified, like, resilience as this word. Like, well, what does that mean to you? And how does that, you know, and what's your definition? And now I can't tell you how many times with Bree and I, like, I've had this we've had this conversation. Holy cow, Bree has this definition of this word that I have never even understood, and we've been using this word in conversation for weeks, right? So yeah, that insight adds a lot of, like, depth and opportunity for understanding.
And
We
you bring
also
up another really incredible point to the amount of comfort that we have with someone almost works in direct opposition of understanding that we're working, or confirming that we're working from the common definition, a common definition. You know, there isn't one. It's that there are many. We have to sometimes shift due to the context.
Yeah. And one of the, I love it, you highlight, Megan, one of the things that, again, a huge surprise to me, but as we develop the different types of questions, and we have levels, right, where we can increase and decrease that safety, like the amount of safety that's needed in the conversation. And what we discovered, and what we actually coach people on, is, like, when you're first starting asking these questions, strangers are easier. The closer you are to someone, the harder it is to have this conversation initially, because you have those already agreed upon definitions, already agreed upon conversation styles, already kind of really ingrained ways of interacting. And we've just noticed over and over, if you're, like, say it's your partner or somebody you work with a lot, if you drop this question on them right out of the gate, like, it often lights up a defensive nature at a much higher rate than if you ask it with a complete stranger. So those ingrained patterns are where we get comfort, and this is about kind of stepping out of that comfort to a degree. Bree, what were you going to say?
Well, I wonder how many arguments have come up for having different definitions of the same word and disagreements.
Yeah.
And we also have a question here from Godswill of, how do you establish to the person that you are asking that they are not bragging, especially in a group context?
Yeah, so I'll answer that as directly as I can. Direct answers aren't my strong suit, but it's the degree of interest. And what I mean by that is, like, authentic interest. Like, I'm not asking you to brag. And it's really focusing on the experience. So again, and I think I've said it a couple of times, there's a fundamental difference in saying, tell me about your opinion on this, tell me how to do this, tell me, right, versus, like, how did you do this, and tell me about the actual experience. And so, like really reaching in there, like, for Lisa, I wasn't asking, like, tell me how awesome you are, even though that's kind of assumed and coded in there, right? Like the intention is to make Lisa feel awesome, but it's also, but how we do that is in the validation that comes from, like, ooh, this is cool, but I don't know how it happened. And I'm legitimate, like, I'm I'm curious how this happened. And again, that's where the selfish part comes on. Like, hey, it's almost, you can almost preload it with like, I've tried that 100 times and never did it. Like, can you tell me how you did it? And having the questions rooted in that experience. And if you noticed, even with Lisa, like the first 3 or 4 questions I asked, Lisa was avoiding telling me about the actual experience. And now she wasn't doing it consciously. Lisa wasn't trying to be like, oh, well, I'm going to make this hard for Brian. Like, we naturally get into like, well, here's how I've done it, or here's how it's been broadly. And if you can focus the person like, oh, in that time, what did you do? That it is uncomfortable at first, but it makes it easier. It makes it easier to come up with the questions, and it makes the conversation maybe more valuable, even though I hesitate using that term, right? Yeah, good to see you, Katie. Yeah, good to have you here. Totally. Yeah, other questions or comments? This was a really great conversation today. Yeah.
And I could really feel that, I didn't realize it until it went from the broadness zoom, and all of a sudden it felt like that. It was just like, oh wow, we're down into it, and it was I could actually feel that, in my system going, okay, now we're going deeper into vulnerability.
And what in that moment, like, what was going through your head in that moment? I feel like you described like there was a choice. Do I engage in this question or not? But tell me about that Zoom for you. Like, yeah.
Honestly, for me, what the image in my head was a magnifying glass going zoom. I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
It's not even I'm looking at you. With you, Brian, I think probably in my life experiences, it would be I'm looking at you. But with you, it was more like, even though I had that mental image of like the attention and the focus coming down to me, which is, something that I kind of have to work on, or I'm working on. That's part of the reason why I volunteered right out of the box. It was like, I need to do this. But with that, I think it was that feeling was it was definitely uncomfortable. But it was something that I was like, but I'm okay. I'm safe and I'm here and I can do this,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that so one of the things that like happened kind of underneath that we really try to teach and be really intentional about is that idea of like, okay, you feel like you have choice in the conversation. You're not obligated, like, well, I don't know, or I can explore, and as I'm writing down, I can explore different areas. But one of the things that I believe makes it so much safer for the other person to engage is the selfish piece of this. That once the other person is like, oh, Brian's actually interested in this. Like, I'm not 100% sure why, right? But this person is actually like, this person really wants to know how I open this jar of pickles successfully. Like, okay. And what happens in those I don't know where I came up with a jar of pickles right there, but here we are. Anyway, but in that moment, what happens is this is less about me. And it's actually more about providing somebody that, and as we call this the equal value exchange. And we've all experienced the opposite, where it's like, hey, tell me about your problem. Like somebody is trying to help me, trying to listen to me, and says, hey, tell me what's going on. What'll happen for me, and I know a lot of other people experiences this, is I start telling them all the challenges I'm having, and about 2 minutes into it, I apologize. And I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm laying all my stuff on you, and I'm sorry. I'm like, and I do the same when I'm like really excited about something. Let me tell you all that's going on. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. And what's happening is my brain is picking up the status disequilibrium, right? That this conversation is valuable to me, but not nearly as valuable to you, and therefore I apologize. And we take that away by saying like, hey, Lisa, I'm really interested in this, and I have to actually be interested in it. And that's the thing that like why we have our membership in the practice areas, is that that's something we actually have to practice. It's less of like, you can understand it like intellectually, but like that feeling of like, oh, I'm oh, this, I'm leaning in and I'm interested in it, and I'm able to ask these questions because I see the value for me. That creates that status equilibrium, that creates that equal exchange of value. It's a thing that we saw over and over again with these conversations being so powerful and helping people with things like engagement and resilience over time by doing nothing more than having a conversation with someone else, is because they're experiencing a conversation where the value is equalized, and therefore the learning is happening on both sides, and the the endorphins, the dopamine, all of the things that we're creating in the conversation are happening not just to one person but to both. And for a lot of people, and I know for me, when we first started doing it, it was just a different experience in a conversation. And then what we show is like that experience in a conversation can actually be an entire listening culture that we create for engagement, for for engagement, for resilience, for improving relationships, that sort of thing, because the underlying concept of how are we engaging with each other, right, and how are we extracting the good, finding good, right, that is inherent in all of us, and using it to drive forward, isn't just a conversation. It's actually a way of structuring relationships, organizations, and broader interactions. But with that, it takes practice. Like you can have the right question, you can understand intellectually all of it, but like getting our brains into a position where we're really comfortable and confident in engaging those, and we know that we can create the safety for someone else. That's a piece that comes with practice. Yeah. So I feel like that's a good place to wrap. Any last questions or comments? Look, time-wise, Bree, almost right at an hour. Go ahead, Megan.
Well, I just really appreciate joining, and also the validation you provided that I'm understanding what I'm hearing. I grew up in a family system where I was told I don't know how to listen, but the problem always was that they didn't like what was being reflected back when they were heard. And that set up a really detrimental dynamic that I still have to do the work around. So I appreciate that now I have the receipt. I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about listening. So maybe you should listen.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I appreciate it very much. This conversation has been great to engage with.
Yeah, same here. I appreciate you and your interaction, and Lisa, thank you for being the brave one this week and jumping around. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hope
Really
you did as
appreciate it,
well.
Brian. Yeah, I most certainly did, and I learned
Yes.
again. I learned a lot. Just the way you can make someone feel at ease. And it's really a gift that you have with that. And like you said, just the practice of you're a master, of course, and being able to ask the right questions. But again, it's the genuine curiosity. It's I really want to get to understand this, and I want to understand you to help somebody else feel heard. And
Yeah,
I think that's really the key for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Lisa. And I think that like really what we're trying to do is help people discover their ability to do this, because I firmly believe this is how we're designed to interact. This is the way we're designed. We humans are designed for connection. The Surgeon General even writes we need connection as on the same level as we need food and water. And when we say listening, to Megan's point, that means a lot of different things. What we're talking about is listening with the intention of connecting, of making the individual feel more understood, more heard, more validated, and doing so in a way that actually benefits both people. And so for anybody listening or anybody on the call, I really encourage you to go check out the membership. You can get the membership free for 2 weeks of signing in, or you could jump on where we have a facilitator program and another program we're launching real soon, where you get into, we don't have just the practice sessions where you're asking other people, but we have a session where we get on a call and we design questions, with myself and other practitioners on there, and a place where we strategize on like how you would bring these conversations into meetings. And so our membership area is gives you access to our workshops, the transformational listening. We do that every week. There's 4 modules. If you're in the program, you can take those as many times as you want. But all of it is designed to give you the confidence to be able to do this. Because I'm less interested, or rather concerned, that people know what this is and can take a test on it. That's important. We'll teach you that stuff. But the more people we can get confident in how they bring it to their teams, how they bring it to their families, how they bring it to their entire organization, that's really our goal. And that's how we've designed this podcast to be interactive, but also where we design our membership and our workshops and even our keynotes to be interactive, that everybody is participating in some way, so that everybody leaves with a little more confidence in their ability to try this out. And I hope you all left with a little bit more confidence yourself. And with that, I think we're going to sign off, because I have a vacation to complete for the rest of the week. But I really enjoyed this. This is definitely worth taking a little time out of the desert rain today. But anyway, appreciate you all, and look for an email from Amber. We'd love to see you on a practice session. All right, take
Thanks so
care.
much for joining us on your vacation too. That was really nice.
No worries.
Thanks. That was great.